the need for digitizing of education much more quickly than it would have happened otherwise. I think thanks to the pandemic, the whole wave of digital education became much stronger because before that, I think a lot of other sectors had been able to capture the digital experiences, but not the education sector. But then, something happened the way they do. And so we see the venture capitalists have been playing a great role in the edtech startup sector. And I think from some figures that I have is that the funding in edtech startup space has almost tripled from January to July 2020, which is about to $998 million from $310 million a year ago. Wow, that's a lot of money you put out there. EdTech is also one of the most funded sectors of 2020. But what is also more important is that the Indian EdTech sector is perhaps now going to be the second largest in the world. And we're looking at almost an industry of nearly $3.5 billion in 2022. That would be really large. While we've also seen that certain kind of startups in EdTech have got funded, primarily, of course, the large takers were Byju's, Vedantu, Unacademy, and the likes. But I mean, one of the areas of interest in today's discussion would be to see that going forward in EdTech, what would be very interesting to fund for the investors. So thank you to the entire stellar panel who's joined us here today. Ravi Kaushik, who's the partner of Waterbridge Ventures, Namita Dalmia, and of course, this shows the kind of work that Ravi has done in the VC space. Namita Dalmia, who is the Director Investment for Omidyar Network, and also sort of manages the social impact of the entire investments, particularly in the education space, education technology space that they are doing. We also have up next Karan Mohla from Chirate Ventures. Anirudh Damani first, who is the managing partner of Artha Venture Fund. And he invests in companies, particularly with follow-on rounds up to Series A. It's a family office fund, and they keep on looking at newer investments, and education today is very interesting. And up next, we also have Karan Mohla. Can I have the next speaker on the screen, please? Who is the partner of Chirate Ventures, and formerly it was called IDG. And I think you have the most envious investments, Karan, in the education technology space today. And it's only likely to become bigger, and we wish you all the best there. And okay. So going forward, let's move ahead with the discussion. And one of the first areas I think that we would like to touch upon in this discussion is as to what, according to the panel, you feel the edtech trends where investments are going to move in will emerge. Understandably, during this time, we have seen tutoring or live classes having sort of got a majority of funding, and anybody who was in live training space, whether it was in K-12 space or whether it was upskilling or whether it was higher education, got majority of funding. But going forward, once we are in the post-pandemic zone, what kind of edtech sectors do you think are going to be very interesting for you to look at? So let me start with Ravi over here to understand, what in edtech is now particularly going to be interesting from a VC perspective.
No, thanks, Ritu, first of all, for the opportunity. Very excited to be here. I think, look, obviously, EdTech is such a vast segment. And if I have to name a couple, I think there are still some white spaces in state government exam. There are a very large number of candidates who give state government exams. There aren't enough EdTech companies who go after them because of a variety of reasons. So I think that is one space which I think has quite a few white spaces there. And the second one is around the whole skilling space, upgradation of your post-degree. Haven't seen enough of those. There are some large companies there, yes, but I think a lot more can happen in that space. So I think I would say these two sort of areas where there could be more opportunities. Not saying there aren't in the bread and butter of EdTech, which is K-12 and test prep, but just sort of throwing it out.
Sure. In fact, today, earlier in the day when the sessions were going on, this was one of the core discussions that assessment has particularly still lagging, because getting any kind of assessment to be done online is still very, very tough. So yeah, you made a great point over there, state assessment, but I think right down to school assessment, it is still very hard for schools to get that going. Anirudh, your thoughts on this? Aman?
Thank you very much for inviting me, and glad to be on this panel. I think I echo what Ravi says. There are still some white spaces, but I also think that there is been some overfunding in certain areas, and I think this whole online education space. Once these schools open up again, whether it is 6 months, 12 months, there is going to be a new normal. However, I don't think all of these platforms that are trying to tutor online or trying to teach online will all survive. I think there'll be a huge shakeout and probably some consolidation over there. That being said, what's really been exciting me during this pandemic is these tech upskilling programs, right? A lot of these companies that are actually helping techies that either graduated from a technology institute or actually are at work, like Ravi was saying, and they're looking at upskilling them while they were at work. I think that's a very interesting space. I've seen some very interesting models over there where it's you don't have to pay unless you get a job, or you get a higher pay, things like that. I think those are very interesting models. I would like to see something in the finance field, because obviously coming from a finance space myself, I think that's definitely an area, because there's a huge lacuna between what happens at the MBA school and what we as PVC or investors, running our funds would actually look for when it comes to financial modeling or research, that kind of stuff. So I think I've been very vocal. I've been looking for someone who's going to reskill or upskill finance workers. I think that's a big space, because there's a couple of really good companies already invested into on the tech side. So I think that would be something very interesting to me.
Sure, totally agree. Karan, I mean, coding has been a very interesting space that has emerged, coding education, that is, in particularly during the pandemic, and we've seen how sort of marvelous journey White Hat Union has done. In fact, Karan was speaking earlier at the forum. So, I mean, do you see such green shoots somewhere in the edtech sector sort of coming up and becoming large in edtech? I mean, coding is one example, but any others that come to your mind?
Sure. I think it's actually a very interesting time to be talking about edtech, and I think credit must definitely be given to Namita and the Umelia team for supporting White Hat Junior for at a time where I think a lot of people didn't quite understand it. But I think what if you kind of take a step back, overall, what this last 6 months has kind of shown, and I think there will be some medium and longer term fallout from that in a good way, is that some of the behaviors will change more or less permanently. And Ravi touched upon one of them, which is if you look at government or state, central or state government or district level exams, I think they've always been there. They will be there. But I think the ability of people who are taking those tests to actually move to more digital platforms has gone up because there's no choice. So I think that's clearly an opportunity which didn't exist before, because there was very little in terms of a digital platform doing it. It was all offline. I think continuing education, continuous learning overall, it's not necessarily it's not a green shoot, but I think the awareness of people to try and continuously upskill, continuously learn, A, because they have time, but B, I think everybody realizes you have to do that, right? So that's more of a mind shift change as opposed to a new industry that started. And then lastly, the one area of early learning or learning for children in sort of outside of school curriculum. So coding is a great example, but I think that kind of shows that there is a much larger and broader market out there, which doesn't necessarily need to be restricted to India, as White Hat kind of showed very well. But I think that part of it, whether it's related to school curricular or whether it's extracurricular, I think that's an interesting area. It's also maybe relatively speaking a little bit easier to start up because it's about aggregating supply, which is there and somewhat fragmented. But I think how you build a sustainable business around that would be interesting to see. So that's probably some of the areas that we see as being either green shoots emerging in new areas, or things which kind of exist in the offline world coming online.
Sure, and we're quite kind of looking forward to this. Namita, any thoughts you have on this? Particularly, so one thing that one of our earlier speakers pointed out was the need for rural education to take a front seat, and the Gram Panchayat becoming more empowered to sort of promote the whole idea of digital education. So from a social impact perspective, what is it that you think EdTech can do more?
Yeah. I think, see, if you, I think one of the earlier speakers mentioned that there is, I mean, the education sector is so diverse, right? If you think about curricula, language, boards, so there is no one size fits all approach. So first of all, there is an opportunity to build scalable and profitable businesses in education, and right now we are scratching the surface in terms of reaching out to CBSE, ICSE, maybe some few couple of state boards kind of permeating, but there is equal opportunity in terms of building for state boards, etc. And I think they're not so much commenting on the role of gram panchayat. I think one will have to figure out an interesting distribution model, because we have to also understand the price point that these students will be able to pay will be much lower than today what we are charging, and hence distribution will become key in terms of innovative mechanism where you can get either a gram panchayat or other influencers to evangelize and get distribution costs low. I think besides what everyone else spoke about, I think there's one more area that I am particularly excited about from an investment perspective, and that is skilling or providing opportunities for students to learn while they are in college. I think one of my biggest pain points is that students finish grade 12, 10th and 12th are like the most worrisome things, and then they enter college, the first and second year just goes by, right? And nobody cares about what is happening. But in come third year, they start really panicking and saying, okay, what do I do? And from the third year till graduation plus 2 years, so many students or young people are in mess, right? Like we know the state of our country. Employers are on the other hand saying these people are not employable. And I think we're talking about upskilling, I think, but there is a real opportunity to actually enter much before, right? So whether it is by means of B2B or B2C directly, but really kind of first catching the attention of college students starting from pre-final year and building some solutions at price points which are not necessarily the upskilling price points today, but lower price points which are attractive to college students. I think there is definitely a real opportunity there. I also agree that the early learning is the exposure to early learning, that will actually create opportunities not just for live learning. I don't think live learning is the only mechanism that will work there. That's where multiple models will happen, whether it's recorded content, whether it's a marketplace model, right? Because people are now exposed to what is possible beyond their immediate neighborhood, where they can send their children for some kind of holistic learning, not so much academic learning maybe. So yeah, so I think it's a very, all in all, it's a very exciting time for what can happen.
So, another thing that came out today is that it's expected 1/3 of the workforce is looking at being part of the gig economy, which means that practically, they might, and with national education policy in place and the pressures of boards becoming lesser now, do you feel the concerns that you mentioned, Namita, would continue to remain the same? I mean, the gig workers who work on projects rather than organizations would continue to face these pressures of trying to compete for degrees or trying to compete for a certain level of grade or something?
Actually, lack of degrees. Sorry to interrupt, but lack of degrees is not the problem. I think we are actually degree manufacturers. The lack of skills is the problem, right? So, skilling is the issue. So we need to kind of intervene and provide them the right skilling before they graduate, so that they're ready for the workforce.
Sure. I mean, so this is my question is to the entire panel here, that do you really feel that, I mean, Unacademy or maybe even a Baiju with now them doing live classes, I mean, Paytm became a Paytm bank at the end of the day. So do you feel these edtech, they're becoming edtech institutions, they're not edtech startups anymore, becoming digital universities, they're becoming, so their courses are actually accredited by ICTE or by CBSE or IB board or whatever. And, they become mainstream education rather than actually just being, maybe just being like a facilitator or support system to the education. They become the main education. Do you see such trends also coming in? Anyone who would like to comment on it?
Well, actually, Prashant, this side, this is true because digital is borderless, And it is also, the skill scale will also depend on what is the strategy, what is that you're offering. And this is quite fascinating to the startup community, that how they will be able to grab that mind share and ultimately the market share. And hence we are seeing that there will be an emergence of very focused players, because if you look at, there are generalistic edtech players and there will be specialist edtech players. So the generalistic market will very soon, flood, and we will actually start getting crowded. But if you actually look at some very specific vocational skills and training, because post COVID, what is likely to happen is also the way people look at their education, 10 plus 2 plus 3 plus 2 is going to change quite a lot. And the decentralization of what we call as an extreme urbanization will also create a lot of opportunities. And hence the quest or a desire of a student to go to urban areas, to premium institutes, will actually start fading. And vocational training, when that starts getting in forefront, what we call as, the skilling, is it for employability only or skilling for entrepreneurship? And that will give a trigger to the next level of the market explosion in the edtech space, is what I feel.
Sure. Thanks, Prashant. Anybody from the panel who would like to also talk about it?
Well, I think there are both models that need to exist, right? One is this full stack, and really basically what is really happening with, as you mentioned, and companies are becoming like full stack and becoming the online learning company instead of an edtech earlier envisaged. But I think there is also equal need for modular services, right? Modular offerings, right? Not all students will want a full stack offering. Maybe they're getting something from somewhere, but they want modular offering also. And in fact, that unbundling is also important from a price point matching perspective, especially as you permeate the market, right? So I think from a product market fit perspective also, I think both will need to coexist, and maybe different companies do the different things, right? For example, Vedantu in our portfolio is a full stack offering versus a Doubtnut can be more modular offering, and is really kind of reaching the next half billion users in very different ways.
Sure. Anirudh, Ravi.
I'd like to add to what Namita said earlier, which is that we India has essentially been a degree manufacturing country, right? I mean, and University of Phoenix, which is the online equivalent maybe of Byju's, started in the US more than 2 decades ago. So I think finally we have something like that over here, because I think education institutes and most NASCOM and all these guys have been complaining for many years that many of these institutes produce candidates that are not even fit for 90% of the jobs that they're applying for. So in that sense, having something like a Byju's or having these platforms, quasi-digital universities, coming out and actually creating programs that will create workers that can fill a specific need for specific organizations. And many of these, I think, because they won't have the management overhead of a typical university, would probably reach out to industry and say, okay, what kind of candidates do you really want, and start preparing them right from the colleges itself. I think that's the need of the hour, right? Creating workers that eventually, as soon as they graduate, can go in and fulfill a role right away. Versus, what's been happening is just creating a standardized beige kind of a worker and then expecting the organizations to sort of upskill them, reskill them over time. I think that's what's going to eventually happen, and you'll see more models like Byju's working out.
Sure. Anybody else who would like to comment on this?
Yeah, just to add, I think if you look at it segment by segment, right? In the K-12 space, nobody's trying to replace the school. Everybody's trying to take the time before and after school. So tuition classes, the extracurricular classes, right? That's the model where every edtech in K-12 is. Similarly, if you look at test prep, there the model is slightly different. They're saying, don't go to coaching classes, take coaching from me because I can teach you all of this and more at a much better way, right? So I think while they can become digital universities and why not, it really has to be seen in the context of which space are they operating in, and hence what is the maximum value add that they can do. Because we have always maintained this, that unless you are replacing an existing solution in edtech, could be an offline coaching institute, offline tuition, whatever, you are not going to be relevant. In edtech, you can't be a vitamin pill. You have to be the core food. Otherwise, it's very difficult to make money, very difficult for people to pay.
Agree. Karan, you want to add to that?
No, I actually think all the points have been quite well covered. But I certainly agree. I think there will be a fairly acute verticalization across EdTech, the same way we've seen in many other sectors that, where digital starts becoming more and more relevant. So I think that's something which will be important in the next 10 plus years.
So do you feel that in education there'll be more digital collaboration than a digital divide?
That's a separate question altogether. I think, let me take that. No, I think there'll be a mix, right? It depends on what segment of the market you're kind of going after. Like we've seen with, like one would have seen with in other sectors, um, there will be a certain base of consumers who will take to a digital or an edtech platform a lot easier. It doesn't necessarily need to be, across socioeconomic classes. Actually, it may be more age-wise, right? People because are more comfortable doing that. But I think there will be some elements of digital collaboration between the offline and the online world. I think the key thing will be, the what since we've been investing in edtech over the last 7-8 years, um, how any edtech platform can become the primary mode of that whatever that user is wanting to do, right? Whether it's learning, whether it's upskilling, whether it's um, based on school or college curriculum. Um, I think when that shift happens, like one has seen with many of the large companies today, that's when a lot of the offerings become more mainstream. That's where you will see a digital divide, right? But ultimately, without the effect that an edtech platform or a learning platform can have digitally, um, we will continue to be a country where the penetration of real education or real learning is at a very surface level, right? So the comment about we're a country that manufactures degrees, I think we'll see everybody taking certifications because they can put it up on LinkedIn. But how does that translate into something more meaningful? I think that's the part which we need to try and solve for, which is kind of happening in some of the other economies where people have kind of realized that. I think we're still at stage 1 or stage 2. So I think that's my view on it, but it's something which is definitely here to stay. It's something which will play a much more relevant role in our lives. It doesn't matter if you're 40 or you're 5. Right? It has to play a much more meaningful role. So that at least that's my view on sort of the collaboration versus the divide question.
Sure. So any other thoughts on collaboration versus divide?
Look, I think the collaboration is only increasing. If you take both Namita and our portfolio company Topnut, I think 90% of the students are from tier 2, 3, and 4, right? So, like Prashant said, it is without borders. So, I think with edtech and proliferation of mobile devices with internet, I think the collaboration will only increase. A lot of material on edtech is still available for free. There are freemium models, premium models, a variety of models exist depending on who you are, what you want to get. But I only think the collaboration will increase. I don't think the divide is increasing. That's my.
The schools are not going away, right? So schools is not only a place of learning. It serves many different purposes. As parents, we would also know that, right? Like it also serves as a place for as daycare, in a very crude sense, but also as a place where kids make friends, right? And similarly, colleges are not going away because real learning also happens beyond academics. I think what's really happening is that where what was completely offline has been challenged to go online, whether it's even in the after school tuition space, right? Like all the tuition, the models which are essentially providing SaaS services to the tuition teachers or now to the schools, right? I think I see this as a more collaboration that will happen. Of course, not everything that's working right now for the lockdown situation will continue to happen because schools are not going to do online classes once they open up, right? But teachers will adopt part of the things that are working for them and will continue to make sense to them. So I think and I think we've been talking a lot about school of future and all of those things, but really it's more about within those boundaries, how do we rethink pedagogy and use technology to enable rather than replace what's happening, right? So,
Yeah. Agree. So, what is back to normal and the new normal of EdTech? So, is everything, do you sort of envision everything remaining the same or becoming the same as in pre-pandemic, wherein schools are going to function the way they used to function, classrooms, or do you see that there is going to be some hybrid mix of digital and physical classroom teaching? But I think more importantly, one of the questions which come to my mind is, and this starts from the first question that I asked you about areas that will emerge now in EdTech. Do you see enterprise EdTech becoming larger, which is actually going to produce technologies for schools to be more enabled, classrooms to be more enabled, so that, a kid is studying on the blackboard in a school, and then he goes home and he studies in Baiju, and he can tell in his head that there is a lot of difference between these two spaces. And so eventually we want to empower the kid, not confuse him. So I mean, what is, so from my understanding, what is back to normal and what is new normal, and how do they come together now?
I think you'll end up, instead of bouncing back, I think we'll be bouncing forward, right? And what I see eventually happening is, all these companies like EduComp and stuff back in the day, I think they were 10 years or 15 years ahead of their time. But now you've got a situation where what was supposed to happen 5, 7, 10 years in our models is all happening today. And the teacher was always one of the, I think the central problem was always that how do you upskill the teacher who doesn't know how to use technology, right? The children already know how to use it. My 1-year-old nephew now knows how to operate an iPad, right? But if I ask my father to do the same thing, trust me, his eyes become really, really wide all of a sudden, right? So I think the same issues that have been happening with teachers is that they look at this technology and they get freaked out by it, right? But because of the pandemic, because if they wanted to continue to have a living, in the last 6 months they've had to adopt, and in many ways they've been able to enhance their skills using technology. And now it's no longer, for many teachers, it's no longer something unknown, right? It's something they've tried, it's something they've used, and something they've gotten used to, right? And I think in the new normal or the bouncing forward that I'm talking about, you will see a hybrid. There will be, you'll still have a classroom style teaching, but I think there'll be a lot more tech gadgets or tech, platforms that teachers will now be, open to and willing to use, because now they've been exposed to it for 6 months, right? It takes 21 days to build a habit. You've been exposed to it for almost 7 months now. And at least for the next 4 or 5 months, I don't see how schools are going to open up 100% until we've got a solution to COVID, right? So in that sense, we've got enough time. We've got a forced change happening, and it's going to be a bouncing forward, not a bouncing back.
Sure.
I think Anirudh brought up the point about what EduComp and all did, and I think the biggest problem was not necessarily the teachers, although that was certainly a problem, but also the ability of schools to adopt those solutions. And I worked with EduComp in another many years back, so I know the problems they went through. And I think that's where the change will probably come bottom up. It will come from students adopting it, leading to teachers having to adopt it, and then teachers kind of pushing schools to do it. But ultimately, large scale change cannot happen, at least in my view, in the near term, given some of the structural issues we have around how schools are run, and the issue around having private schools and adhering to state curriculum, etc. So I think there'll be some parts of it which will certainly have to seep in, because if other stakeholders like parents and teachers and students are demanding it, schools kind of have to listen to them. But there is this great, there is rigidity to change, and that will not happen just because we're going through a pandemic or once schools open up, even in 2022. Hopefully this puts us on the course for change in the longer term, and that's certainly my very strong positive hope, right? But I do think, going back to the earlier point, that it will create that change amongst teachers, like Anirudh said, much more so than students, because students kind of already were doing it. But hopefully it'll create the ability for educational institutes to adopt it, to adopt digital infrastructure, digital platforms, and digital way of thinking. I think it's not about teaching, it's about how you think digitally first.
Philosophy.
We most of us do think digitally first today, right? Pre-pandemic or post-pandemic, doesn't matter. That will take a little bit of time, but hopefully this is a good catalyst.
And I can tell you, investors are looking at this space, you saw the funding that happened in Lead School, which is a full stack model for schools. And we have also made an investment in an, starting as an enterprise solution to schools. We will be announcing it soon, and which enterprise to learning solution, but more modular. So I think both full stack and modular kind of work. So one has to kind of figure it out. So we're definitely looking at this space from investment opportunity perspective.
This looks really interesting. Yeah, Ravi, please.
No, just to add, I think everyone's right. I think I'm expecting digital schools going forward. Teachers have adopted, schools are forced to adopt, parents and students are already there. That's one. And second, I think for the first time, we as parents know what our kids actually do, right? What kind of classes they take, how do they take, do they answer questions, what kind of homework do they get, how do they study, which means that the transparency between the school and the parent has dramatically increased.
Yeah.
And they can't go back on that. Right? Because of that transparency, teachers and schools will be forced to continue to give this transparency and more going forward. That automatically will lead to adoption of tech. Right? What I'm still waiting to see is efficacy of pedagogy on the child, whether it's offline, whether it's online. I'm yet to see that. Right? There's a lot of talk of AI, there's talk of ML, personalized learning journeys, and all of that. But I'm yet to see all of that play out in the students, in children, to see are they thinking dramatically different with this versus that. And I'm hoping that we'll get some answers to all of these three things over the next 4 to 5 years.
You've already mentioned teachers here, and everybody has. So, I mean, I think Anirudh was right that one of the reasons why schools have been lazy about adopting technology much earlier before pandemic was that, schools as well as the teachers were still on a back foot when it came to adopting technology. But now that teachers have been taking classes for more than 6 months today, online, what bridges do you see the teachers crossing and the teachers as a community crossing? I mean, why should honestly, I can tell you some private schools are still very good, but go down to government schools, go down to very small private schools. I mean, a teacher would feel that he's much better off or she's much better off being or tutoring on a Baiju or a Vedantu or some other place. So what bridges do you see them crossing through this? And do you think for them, online teaching, having YouTube channels would become more lucrative than actually becoming a school teacher? And what disruption do you see happening there in the coming time?
Sure, I'll take that. I think two to three things are happening. One is, like you rightly said, if it's financially more remunerative to work for an edtech company today, then the good teachers, the teachers who have the ability and the skills to teach online, communicate well, have those skills will move there. What is also happening is the teachers who are struggling to teach online will probably be asked to leave the profession, because teachers have to adopt a lot of times technology, and if they don't, then it's going to be difficult for them to survive. So we're seeing both of these two things happen. Right? The top cream, the people who want better financial returns, and rightfully so, adopt some of these edtech platforms, and the ones who are struggling to adopt tech will have to reskill themselves pretty rapidly. Otherwise, it's going to be a tough way forward.
But do you see schools becoming losers in this because they might lose their best talent to online or digital space?
I think no, they might lose some talent, sure. I think we cannot completely disregard that. But schools aren't going anywhere because, like Namita rightly said, I think schools are a place for kids to not just learn academically, but every other life skill possible. So they might lose some talent, but I don't think they will suffer.
And so far, I mean, some of these online platforms have been running even before the pandemic, and a lot of teachers, majority of teachers are the first time teachers, right? So these are not people who've been teaching. And if you think about it, a lot of these online tuition happen 4 to 9 p.m., right? So if the schools teachers were to change the profession, it will not be because of pandemic or they are finding these platforms more lucrative. I think these platforms are actually finding new talent, right? So I don't see this as an either or. It's basically increasing the workforce, and maybe you will lose, right? And that's the part of competitive any market, right? But that I don't think schools will be losers here. There will be a pressure on schools to recognize talent, which is a good thing overall, because teaching as a profession is not teachers crave for recognition, they crave for career progression, and all of this have been systemically missing from the from the school structure. So some of those things actually need to come in place. So if at all, there will be a good pressure on the school system to do good on those things.
So yeah, I mean, the bigger worry is really for the schools in this case, as and that our children are there practically from 9 to 3. So, so we're looking at some kind of disruption happening in that space. So another area that one has been seeing, and you rightly said, preschool and after school, and coaching being one of the very big areas that is going to be impacted. So live teaching versus pre-recorded content. What are your thoughts on it? Do you think we are moving towards an era of more live teaching online, even when we're back to normal and open up as a society? Or do you feel that pre-recorded content is going to somehow lead the stack? Karan, you want to take that?
Yeah, again, I think it's entirely dependent on use case, right? If you are, looking at light learning or things which can be even sort of imparted through small groups, excuse me, it does not necessarily, in my opinion, at least have to be live learning, right? But if it's concept-based or practical adaptation of what you're learning, and certainly age group wise, right? I think it's easier for slightly older, it's a young adults or adults to have pre-recorded content and be able to assimilate from that. But for younger children, having pre-recorded content does not necessarily work, even if it's even if it's light learning. So I think it squarely depends on what is being taught. I think what I have seen a lot of platforms do well is have a combination of both, where you have both live as well as pre-recorded, which allows you to also go back and check on concepts that one has been learning, because even in school, right, even in a physical setting, you're not necessarily taking everything that's being taught. Even on one-on-one, if it's in a physical setting, sometimes you do have to go back and revise. So I'm not sure why that behavior would change just because you're in a digital platform. So I think the platforms which deploy a combination, especially if it's beyond light or surface level, that's probably the right way to look at it. But I think it's about having the right tools to help people in an asynchronous environment. If you don't have the right tools, if that infrastructure is not in place, which takes care of things like bandwidth, how to go back, how to be able to check on concepts on a asynchronous basis, then that environment also doesn't work. So I think those are things that some of the platforms need to take care of while they're building it.
Any second thoughts on that?
I think an element of this question also exists in the previous question, right? Like, so how do you augment teacher incomes, right? And I think if I go back to the time when I was in school, and at least most of my nieces and nephews today, most teachers not only taught in school, but they also gave tutoring, right? And there could be an element where, you still have the teacher coming to school, right? Because that is required to keep up with the curriculum and things that are going on. But you also have them doing pre-recorded classes, right? Or doing live classes. So live classes could cost more and the pre-recorded classes could cost less. And now the teacher can use technology to, grow their reach almost exponentially, right? I mean, if you look at even the father of valuation, which is Aswad Damodar, and he gives his NYU Stern classes for free, right? You can actually join the live class and do it for free. Why couldn't teachers do that? Like, why couldn't schools do that, right? And today, they could then go to even a small village and compete with the government school by offering better content and better reach, right? And I think these kind of things, again, this is all crystal ball gazing at this point, but these are all possible, and it's all possible in the future, as Karan said, if the if the education ministry, if the government starts promoting and allowing these things to happen, I definitely see that this is a model that will evolve, and we'll obviously find multiple different variations of it.
Sure. Another area that I would want to touch upon is upskilling, reskilling, and the future of work. Certainly, everybody knows that the job market is now dwindled, particularly during the pandemic, and reskilling and being ready for the new economy, the digital economy is very important. So, do you feel that edtech and the job market tech somewhere needs to now get more collaborative, and therefore the competition between universities and edtech companies giving upskilling courses is going to become more intense in the coming times?
Actually, I think there is also, this is similar to your question on collaboration versus divide, right? So there is actually also a lot more opportunity for collaboration for upskilling companies which have been focusing on people already in the workforce to now go and collaborate with universities and start offering for what I was initially talking about, starting from pre-final year to final year. And some of these companies are already doing that, right, as we speak, right? They've started this as soon as the pandemic hit and colleges were facing with all the challenges. But to your original question on the job, linking the skilling and the job tech, I think it's an important one because uh, I, I think the consumers are going to become smarter. It's not just about the access and the degree anymore. It's about the outcomes. And for the outcomes, you have to do skilling and placements both. And the more the collaboration can be, either the models are built for skilling and placement fully, or there could be some kind of collaboration between the job tech and the skilling that would actually be more beneficial, and you can create more value and capture more value as a result, right? And build successful businesses. So we specifically look for outcomes linked skilling programs, whether it is upskilling or first time skilling. So I do agree with you that there needs to be more linkages.
Sure. Anybody who would
Yeah,
like?
no, I would agree. I think, yeah, just to add, I think it's a little bit more nuanced, right? For instance, if you are trying to upskill an existing college student, I don't think he's interested in upskilling. He's interested in a job. Most kids in India go to college, get a degree and a job, right? So while the positioning to him is upskilling, he's interested about, can this get me a job, right? So which means that if you're doing it at a college student level, it has to be at a lower price point, and I need conversion. The second nuance to this is we have obviously seen schools that come with income share agreements, etc. While theoretically, I think it sounds good. I think there is a massive change in behavior that's required because in India, if someone says that you have to give me a part of your salary for the longest of time, they will balk at it. It's the same thing as a loan, but the perception is very different, right? He's like, boss, I deserve this job. I'm not going to give you a share of my income. So there is consumer behavior change that's also required. So I think it's a very massive opportunity, but it has to be played very sharply, very smartly, depending on the segment that you're going after. Because each segment, whether you are -1 pre-graduation or 1 to 5, 5 to 10, the perception, the value prop is very different for each.
Sure. And I mean, finally, any thoughts on the national education policy? I mean, how do you think that is going to be a big kick starter for the digital world? I mean, if I were to look at how government is thinking, they're entirely happy with having digital schools and digital varsities going forward. I mean, which is a good thing because obviously they're looking more from a penetration and access perspective. So it completely works over there. But I think the middle road that you said, where a good teacher can actually sort of also teach the through pre-recorded sessions to government schools or anybody else, is far more favorable. So, I mean, what is your thoughts on the national education policy and the outcome of it, maybe 5 years down the line?
I can take that up, the first stab. I think there's a lot of very useful propositions in national education policy, right? It is full of great ideas. Of course, the implementation of it will be a challenge, and and they've put out a 15-year roadmap, right? It's not like it has to happen all tomorrow. But I think some of the things that they've called out are going to ask for quality and hence collaboration, right? And what I mean by that, like for example, they are talking about assessment reform completely. Assessments is not going to be route based anyways, right? I know CBSE is already thinking about the board exam reform. So once that starts to happen, even starting from grade 5, the teachers have to start teaching differently. It's not only about grade 10 and 12 anymore. Then there's an inclusion of all digital skills, life skills. So this will require overhaul of curriculum, inclusion, including new curriculum, and and especially the early, even starting the early childhood, even though private schools offer already nursery KG, but there is going to be a lot more focus on play-based learning, etc. Similarly, in higher education, right now they're talking a lot more about access, which is to increase the gross enrollment ratio. Hopefully, we'll not make the mistake that we've made in the past of just increasing the access and not focusing on quality at all. And hopefully, the consumers will also come out and really say that this needs to be more outcome oriented. So there's going to be both, because the schools will need to move, but also consumers will start demanding better, especially in higher education. So I'm very hopeful that if policy implemented well, will lead to more collaboration and more opportunities.
Sure. So the marriage between quality and access needs to somewhere be created.
Yeah.
Sure. Anybody else who wants to comment on the national education policy and its outcomes?
No, I think Namita sort of encapsulated it really well. I think it's hard to find fault with the intent, and the ideas that are prescribed. It will really require a overhaul on all fronts, right? Both on the instructor side, on the institute side, on how parents and children sort of view the entire education cycle. I think it's not sure if it'll have a lot of deep impact in a 5-year period, as Namta also said. I think it's certainly a 15, 20. I think these are generational changes, which take a long time. But I think ultimately, if things work well, the best outcome one can hope is a genuinely skilled population that can take advantage of several opportunities that will exist into the 2030s and 40s. That will our world 20 years from now will be very different, right? So you want to have a population that can take care of that and not have a demographic dividend which comes and actually becomes a liability like it seemingly is right now. So I think that's the big consideration to really address.
Totally. So there's a question that has come on from our event platform, which says that, and it's directed to Namita. You spoke about the need for education for first year and second year students. What exactly are the opportunities you're referring to?
Yeah, I think from both teaching technical skills and employability skills, there is a need. So I think you can graduate as a computer science engineer, but you really do not know how to code, and there's a lot of report and data already out there, right? So even if you teach, so there is so even just the technical skilling from that perspective, the stream in which students are learning, and I don't mean only coding, right? It could be other engineering subjects or other, even accounting, commerce, right? So the technical skills need to be sharpened, and the other is really the employability skills, right? Which could be, quote unquote, soft skills. So there's an opportunity in both in terms of skilling and getting them prepared for workforce.
Sure. Another question is, do you see edtech startups getting challenged because of offline? Once the school starts, they might have their enrollment might go down.
I think it depends on where in the edtech space are you operating.
I think
If you're trying to
like tutoring classes or to the likes of even maybe yeah.
Yeah, I think it's only going to go up because once people have seen the value of technology, used it, experienced it, the value of all the tools that come with it, people don't go back. We've seen that with e-commerce. We've seen with multiple other sectors. I think it's actually going to continue to go up.
Okay. So, well, that was an interesting discussion. Any parting thoughts that you have on, edtech and where you see it going in the coming time? So maybe particularly once we open up December 2020, what does it look like for the edtech sector? Ravi,
Let's say,
oh no, go on, Namita.
No, I'll just say I'm just seeing such influx of high quality talent in the edtech space, the entrepreneurs, right? So that, ultimately those are the rock stars, right? And, that makes me even more hopeful about the sector.
Surely. Ravi?
Yeah, no, I think it's an incredibly exciting times. A lot of opportunities, lots of overfunding. I think in the short term, you will expect a lot of funding to go to what I call as a big three of edtech in India, and they will attract tons of capital. Over a period of time, the cycle will wane off. The euphoria will wear off. There will be some pain in some sectors where overfunding has happened. But I think overall the opportunities are massive, massive segment, massive pools of capital, massive profit pools, 80% gross margins for the few sectors which can give you that. So I think the promise is great. Absolutely.
Do you see some M&A activity increasing once things open up in the edtech space?
I think so. It's already happening, and I think it will continue to happen. Definitely.
Anirudh?
As a country, we spend almost 3% of our GDP. Public expenditure on is almost 3% of GDP. Plus, I think every middle class, in fact, not just middle class, but every class of family in India, right, earmarks a large chunk of their savings towards a child's education. So as far as money is concerned, this is the largest pool of money we can even think about that is getting spent on an annual basis, right? But again, and I think everyone's sort of reference is that let's not get overexcited, right? There is still a lot of work to be done. The NEP policy is, lays out things to 2040, which means there is 5 national elections minimum that need to happen by the time this policy completely rolls itself out. So, entrepreneurs should be cognizant. They should be nimble and just not get caught up with the massive numbers. You need to really have, it's much more important to figure out which part of the river you cater to versus the entire size of the river itself.
Karan, do you see a quota getting wiped off because of the pandemic and edtech?
No. I think longer term, because of the size of the opportunity, because of the ongoing spend, I think the spends on education and learning will just go up, because as each generation will subsequently spend more on, or will want to spend more on their children as well as a little bit on themselves, which wasn't the case 30, 40 years back, right? I think the only takeaway really is, there is obviously a lot of interest from investors and founders. There are several areas within edtech where you can build good, sustainable businesses. You don't need to necessarily go for, outrageous growth rates. The growth rates will come as the market evolves, and we've seen this in every market or every segment of the market that got digitized. Hopefully we'll all learn our lessons from that, but I think ultimately, yes, it's certainly on the large area where the sets of outcomes can be multiple, will probably be multiple. We've seen 3-4 companies already. That inflection point is probably already happened, and there will be another inflection point probably 5-6 years from now.
Sure. Thank you very much to the entire panel. I think some great inputs out there, and I'm absolutely excited and looking forward to what is going to happen in the education space in the coming times. I've never seen so much vibrancy in this sector ever. I mean, we've been doing events on education for the longest time, but I think the times that I've seen in 2020 for this sector is unparalleled. So thank you for coming and sharing and giving us sort of a future crystal gaze as to what the sector looks like in the coming times. And I'm glad to hear that, the idea is not to disrupt educational institutions, but to work closely and see that there is going to be a bigger the empowerment of the child who is looking to take quality education. So, I would request the panel if they can stay back with us for another 5 or 6 minutes. We have some education awards that we are giving to some of the most, up and coming organizations, and also to organizations who've digitally empowered themselves during the pandemic. So I'm going to give it to Kavya for announcing the awards.
Thank you so much, Ritu, and thank you indeed to all of our panelists for a very engaging discussion. And I'm actually reminded of this illustration that I read on Reader's Digest. The teacher is writing something on the blackboard. She turns to the students and says, "Students, please take out your notes." And cut to 2020, the teacher is standing right out there saying, "Students, take out your notes," which means Samsung Note 1, Note 2, Note 3. So it's interesting to see how the dynamics have shifted, especially the last 6-7 months. But on that note, it's it's also time to celebrate these amazing, cool ideas and amazing leaders as well. So here we go. What we're going to do is actually share across on the screen the categories as well as the winners. I know it's a virtual avatar or virtual format, so we'll all come together and clap for them. But on that note, let's get started with our next category. Here we go. Let's have it on the screen. We're talking about the Online Teaching Excellence Award. That's a category here, ladies and gentlemen, all our delegates, all our guests, all our speakers. And this award goes to Mr. Arvind Gupta. So let's have a round of applause as well, sitting at the comfort of our homes, for Mr. Arvind Gupta, who in fact has been someone who's been pioneering and very inspiring name in terms of ensuring that online teaching actually gets the kind of space that it deserves. With that, we're going back to back. So let's quickly move on to our next category. This is the Best Computer Coding Education Solution. That's the category on the screen. And this award goes to Camp K-12. In fact, Camp K-12 has been teaching coding to children since 2010. So it's amazing how we are actually seeing the entire idea of coding come to fruition now. So congratulations to Camp K-12. Time for our next category. Ladies and gentlemen, here it is on the screen for all of you. The Emerging CEO of the Year. Ladies and gentlemen, and the award goes to the founder and CEO of Daily Rounds, Mr. Deepu Sebin. Daily Rounds, in fact, he being the CEO, they in fact managed to train 1 million doctors today and training the machines tomorrow. So it's been a good amalgamation of people and the machines over there. Amazing indeed. Congratulations to Mr. Deepu. With that, let's move on to our next category. Now it's time for a little musical fanfare over here because we're talking about the best learning platform in performing arts, music, dance, and drama. So it's time to get the fanfare on for none other than Furtado's Music. A very fine... I remember getting my guitar classes from Furtado's Music. So yes, that's a little testimony coming from my end as well. So congratulations to the team. Let's now move on to sports coaching. So from music, let's move on to sports coaching. And the award for sports coaching goes to kelomore.com. Just when I was wondering with the pandemic, how could people actually venture out and play any kind of sports? But Kelo More sort of brings to you one-on-one sessions, online sessions with credible coaches. So it's interesting how the education has not halted with the pandemic as well. Let's quickly move on to our next category. Here we go. It's innovation of an education philosophy. Innovation of an education philosophy. And the recipient of this award is Mr. Ritesh Raval. Well, his dream is to bring all aspects of the education and of life as well in order to build stronger minds of India. So I think that's a fabulous initiative there. Congratulations, Mr. Ritesh. Let's now move on to our next exciting category. We're talking about best online children's learning by a preschool. And, well, this award goes to Euro Kids. I believe EuroKids has always been a very pioneering name. And now, of course, with the whole change, they have engaged themselves in one motto which says, staying home, staying engaged. It's now time for our penultimate category for the evening. And here we go. This is the best data or learning analytics solution provider. That's our next category coming up for all of you on the screen. Best data or learning analytics solution provider. Ladies and gentlemen, this award goes to RubyScape. Rubyversity, the future school. I've also been informed that we have Mr. Prashant Pansare of RubyScape joining us to share his thoughts. Mr. Prashant, we can have you on the screen as well. I believe Mr. Prashant has joined us. We're going to request you to please turn on your camera. Yes, sir. There you are. Over to you.
Thanks, Kavya. It's been quite inspiring and timely for us because we incorporated this, DIPP-based Made in India data science product company in February 2020. And very recently, we have launched Rubyversity, which is an edtech application. And how we look forward to disrupt the data science and artificial intelligence is by providing the software, knowledgeware, and everything inside one single box. So we certainly feel humbled and excited, and we dedicate this innovation to the Atmanirbhar Bharat movement. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Congratulations to you.
Congratulations very much indeed, Mr. Prashant. And on that note, we'll also announce the last category for the evening, and I'll also have Diksha joining in from Camp K-12, who will also share her thoughts, one of the winners. But our last category is Most Interactive Program by a Preschool. Okay, here we go. Most Interactive Program by a Preschool, and the award goes to Clay School. Well, as I say, ideas, perspectives, and knowledge for the new age parents as well. So while we do come to the end, I've been informed we have Anshul, who's here from Camp K-12, who in fact, Camp K-12, as I earlier announced, is the winner in the category of Best Computer Coding Education Solution. So Anshul, if we can quickly have you on the screen as well to share your thoughts.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I think I'm not allowed to share the video. So for now, I will just go with audio. Just want to let you guys know that I sat through the whole thing. Ritu, I think you did a great, this was a phenomenal panel. And I feel, can you guys see me?
Yes.
Awesome. I feel like the folks on this panel are incredibly articulate and have some impressive clarity of thought. A lot of the discussion revolved around this idea of disrupting schools. I heard both sides of the story. I heard, I think from one of you, I think it was Ravi, that on one hand, the only meaningful stuff that sticks around is stuff that replaces, in this case, schools. And I heard strong opinions that we can't replace schools for many great reasons, which I also believe in. But I actually would like to take a different stance. I feel like it's a matter of time. I feel like online schools and offline schools can coexist. You know, what got me into this space is I've been an educator, I've been a coder, and I fundamentally believe that the school model that exists today, it's important for the reasons you mentioned, social skills, the physical space, creating a type of learning that's hard to replicate online. But I'm a tech progressive. And I think that for the internet generation, there is an opportunity to build an internet school. And I feel like one of you talked about pedagogy. Like one thing you haven't seen is technology actually enabling us to have pedagogy that works. I think one of the reasons why you'll see online schools becoming large, maybe not replacing offline schools, but becoming large, coexisting with offline schools, is because I think tech allows you to build pedagogy that you can't even replicate offline. And I don't want to go into the details of this, but I am a firm believer in it. And I just want to appreciate, the recognition you've given us and let you know that while we humbly accept this for the coding education category, our vision really is to think about School 2.0. And we think it's going to be a vision of communities, of pull. Coding is a category with strong pull. And you'll be hearing a lot more from us. So thank you very much.
Congratulations once again. And we look forward to seeing your vision actually manifesting into something bigger and more as we go ahead.
Thanks so much.
Congratulations, Anshul, and congratulations to the entire team of Camp K-12 as well. On that note, yes, we do come to the end of the awards categories as well. So firstly, congratulations to all the winners. I think, Ritu, just as one of our speakers, Mr. Dilip had said, today being the birthday of Sri Abdul Kalam, I think it was only befitting to have this kind of a conclave and awards being hosted by the entrepreneur, on a very, very beautiful day. So I must also thank the team. But with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Ritu, for the closing note for the entire conclave and awards. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Kavya. And I would like to thank all our esteemed speakers who joined us here today. And I think the day we started at about 10 o'clock, we're about 5:15. And I can tell you some beautiful ideas got shared. It's just, as I said, we've been doing a lot of sort of bringing together and collaborative meets of the industry, both from edtech space, education space, and there were more conflict. It's the first time ever that I have seen some collaboration and industry actually thinking on one straight path, which is digitization and trying to personalize education for the student and making his life a lot more beautiful when it comes to getting educated, more fun, more where he's engaged, his parents are more engaged. And I think it's just the beginning of times where we will see education industry becoming so much bigger and wider in terms of really giving to the student what he is looking for during the 22, 23 years that he or she spends in it. And then, of course, going forward when they're working and they're upskilling, reskilling themselves to gain from it. So we continue to hope that the education industry will take the best interest of the student in heart, and we would have more such players, young companies, emerging companies that started a while ago and became very, very large, only growing, and we will continue to have them, more and more of them, showcasing their innovative ideas on this very platform. Thank you very much for everybody who joined us today for the entire day of the conference or a few sessions. I hope they were useful for you. I would love to hear any feedback that you have, either regarding the session, speakers, or content during the day on my LinkedIn account. So please reach out to me at Ritu Maurya over LinkedIn, and we would love to hear from you and your ideas. Thank you very much for joining us. And as you said, that it is Dr. Abdul Kalam's birthday, and it's indeed a very befitting day to have the Innovation in Education Conference. And thank you once again to everybody who joined us and made this day fruitful.